Want to hear my impression of a drunk white girl? You got me fucked up. You got me fucked up. You got me fucked up, bitch. No, like, you got me, I'm like fucked up. I'm so fucked up. What we gotta talk about? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Guild Wars 2 video. I'm joined here, once again, by my friends, because these are the only friends that will never leave me. But, I just got done recording another World of Warcraft video, and I'm already set up in this position. So I thought I might as well just continue on and do my Guild Wars 2 video while on the ground, next to my bed. One of my very few safe spaces in life. So, probably from the title and the thumbnail of this video, you can glean that this is going to be about Guild Wars 2 Champions, Chapter 1, Truce, and my review and reaction to this release. I'm gonna kind of break it into 3 chunks: story, the dragon response missions, and rewards slash replayability. I'm going to just begin, before I get into the specifics, by saying that it's a day after the initial release. A lot of things are subject to change, I hope. And the community itself has had very strong reactions. Once again, critique, I'm all for. Bashing developers, etc., etc. We're not doing that here. No. So comment down below, but keep it critical and keep it appropriate, logical, and analytical, okay? So let's begin by talking about the story. All in all, I like the story. It's not something that is gripping me. It does feel somewhat rushed, a little bit, I will say, but I also understand that this is pretty much acting as the segue into End of Dragons. That's my personal opinion. I would have liked somewhat more of a lead up. I know we were talking to Bangar, etc., etc. We had the earthquakes, but it was so subtle and only relegated to certain areas that it didn't feel as appropriate as I would have liked. But the story for Champions Chapter 1, it starts with you going to Ratasum, or actually you going to Eye of the North and conversing with Aurene, Bangar, Ritlock, and Bram. And it's nice. I liked that portion because it was the exposition. It was the prologue, essentially, to Primordus awakening. And you were kind of just told that Primordus is awakening. Once again, you did have some small inklings with the earthquakes being shown to you in-game that he was waking up. But it was more so just like you were told. And in terms of narrative, you don't typically want to tell people a lot. You typically want to show them before you tell them. However, I, once again, fully understand that you got to get things moving. You got to keep it moving. And I don't think it's terrible. It was just like, for my expectations. But that little instance was nice. It told you that Primordus was waking up. Jormag is a very interesting character. I actually have grown to like Jormag more than I thought I would, in terms of like Jormag being their own smart entity and making some very like good points in terms of like they have their own right to life and they have their own right to amass an army to protect themselves. Because what I'm getting is that Primordus and Jormag are going to end up clashing. Primordus is more so going to be the aggressor to Jormag. That's what I feel is happening so far. But the story was okay. And then you go to Ratasum, you deal with some destroyers, and then you are flung into a perpetual cycle of Eye of the North. You get there, and then you're immediately contacted by someone, and you're told to just go through the portal again. And this is where I feel like the story begins to devolve in certain ways. And I think that It's probably because they are working primarily on End of Dragons, where they couldn't really execute this to its greatest potential. The major problem with its story is that it's instanced and completely disconnected from the actual areas of Tyria. No longer is this Icebrood Saga a living world, it's an instance world. And of course there were instanced story beats. I'm not talking about that, but the fact that this chapter has no open world aspect to it, and that it's only story based in instances called dragon response missions, that's where I take a little bit of gripe, because it's supposed to be the climactic, cinematic, best living world finale Icebrood Saga that they've had. At least that's what it was kind of told to be. And in my mind, the best possible living world execution, at least for me and probably a couple other people in the community, was the Battle for Lion's Arch, a real world, real-time event that was happening in the open world, fundamentally changed the way the story was going, how people interacted with maps, the Scarlet invasions of real-world maps to repopulate those zones, etc., etc. That is what and I would assume many others, hold to be the highest standard of the open world storytelling. With Champions, I was under the guise that these core zones, Gandharan Fields, Matrica Province, Brisbane Wildlands, would all be under assault in the open world. Now, that could have been my fault because, you know, I might have just been hoping for that because that's kind of like the good quality I expect. But no, these are not open world. These are all instanced in 1 to 5 man zones. I initially thought dragon response missions were something completely different than the actual story. I also thought that the dragon response missions would add extra story and be like the strike mission version, or strike mission replacement. But no, dragon response missions are the story. They are the open world content, but in an instance and accessible with 1 to 5 players. Now I'm going to actually talk about the dragon response missions themselves. I already covered that they were not what I was expecting. I was expecting the story to take place in open world maps, to fundamentally change the maps, and it could be done. And once again, I think this is probably because that they didn't have enough attention on Icebrood Saga. They're more working on End of Dragons. But what they could have done is saved those existing maps that they are focusing on, but then create a secondary map, which it seems that they already have done. They made a second map in the data files and then tweaked it and changed things. You could have just done that, and then once this chapter was over, you kind of revert it back to what it was before. But then, of course, you could have them re-accessible via Aya the North, via the scrying pool, or via the portal. I think it was a really big downside that these things are not open world. Now I'm going to talk about the actual events and the bosses. They're all pretty... They repeat, like, the functions and the events. You gotta do something here, you have a certain amount of time, you got a certain amount of tasks to complete. You complete it, you gain a morale boost, which increases your stats, which makes it easier. And then you follow along something, there's a story narrative that you follow, you go somewhere else, and you deal with another couple events, a little story exchange, and then a boss spawns. Now, I was actually, the very first time I played this, I was given early access by ArenaNet. Thank you so much. I had to solo them. And these things are supposed to be 1 to 5 players. Keep that in mind. 1 to 5. And it took me an hour each to kill the bosses. And I was on a very tanky necro, so I was very lucky to be able to survive and to also still be able to do a decent chunk of damage. But when you look at it as this is the main modem and medium for the storytelling, I can't help but wonder, like, months down the line, once End of Dragon actually releases and the bulk of the people moving away from this content, it's going to be really hard for people to replay this stuff because you won't be able to get as many people together easily. You're going to have to wait a long period of time if you want a full group, or you're going to have to go in by yourself and kind of struggle with dealing like millions of damage to this one boss mob that isn't super engaging. Because you can kind of like, they have like 2 mechanics that you get really used to, and once you get used to them, they're not a problem. But it's mostly just like the amount of health that they have is so enormous that soloing it takes so long, and you don't want to do it. So I think for the longevity that they should be reducing their health. I think they might have already have. I think I saw something on Twitter where they did. But in terms of a larger group, I think that's okay. I think with a larger group, it's okay to have more health. You have more people there. But it doesn't take away from the fact that the bosses themselves don't have super interesting mechanics. They're not super deadly, other than the Gendaran Fields one. Is it Gendaran Fields? I think it's Gendaran Fields. The Harpy, the Destroyer Harpy, the Tornadoes, that is the most interesting mechanic of them all. The Crab one and the Iron Hammer one, they're both really bland and kind of easy. Iron Hammer one, you just gotta dodge all the flame drops, but sometimes they don't even target you. They just kind of go randomly. So you might not even have to deal with them. Just dodge CC and bring stability. Like they're very easy mechanics. But I understand that the normal mode is for story, primarily. At least that's what I assume to be the system. Now for the challenge mode, I gotta say, you know what? It might not be the best. It might not be the top tier rating content that we have been exposed to in the past, but I have to say that the challenge, I actually had a lot of fun, and I was like, I don't know if it's because it was the first time I did it, but I was like trying to coordinate my group. I was like, get the fissures and just run. Don't deal with the ads, just go to the next objective. So, because it's timed, and it's timed in their boons, so I actually really like that because you have more playstyle options in terms of spell breakers or boon strippers or boon corruptors. Ow. So it adds a different playstyle, and I actually like the timer on this one. It's just long enough to allow you to, for like a less organized group, to get gold, but just short enough to really give you that sense of urgency. We beat and got gold rank with 30 seconds to spare. So if you really like grind it out and get a perfect group going, I think in like a week or 2, people will have no problem getting gold. But for that early group, it does require you to be kind of like aware, at least. So I actually like the challenge stuff. I think it's cool. The rewards, I think you just get more rewards. I would have liked if you got a little bit more faction currency. You may or may not, I'm not too sure. That's another thing I want to talk about. Faction currency. You have 2 different types of currency. One of them that is put into your wallet immediately, and one that is just in your inventory. I think it's a real bummer that these are A, not open world events, and B, that you really have to only be playing it on one character, or have a bunch of shared inventory slots where you just put them in there. Because I tried to go do it on a couple other characters, and it just felt weird having a bunch of currency spread out across all the characters, and then I have to go back to my bank, and it's just that extra step that kind of like deters me from wanting to play other characters in these missions. So I would have liked it if it was just one currency that you would have to decide, okay, am I going to split it up in terms of, am I going to give it to the global event support for the factions, or am I going to use it to get rewards for myself? It's like that, do you give it to the group or do you give it for yourself type mentality. But because they're 2 separate currencies, it's pretty easy to just like, there's no option. You just go like one or the other. It's just a slight downside. It's not the worst. Not great. Really. Now let's talk about the rewards. I'm not done chewing, actually. Hold on. Okay, so the rewards. I got the Crystal Bloom skin in a day. The Crystal Bloom axe skin in a day. I really wanted it to be like a special weapon collection that you get from doing a bunch of the achievements, but it's just a currency thing. The real rewards will come with the volcanic weapon and the dragon slayer weapon sets. And the volcanic one is just a recolor, I know, but you know, sometimes recolors work because other characters have different color palettes and stuff. So I'm not too mad at that. But the Dragon Slayer will be a much more interesting one. I don't know when that is actually going to be available. I think these are also time gated and locked to the meta achievement, or the meta for this, where you're just putting resources into a specific faction for them to arrive in 6 days. So the rewards are kind of like, they're okay. They're just new skins and I like them, but they're there. And that's another thing I want to talk about, the time gating. I actually am not a huge opponent to time gating. However, when the content seems to be so thin and it appears that we're just going to be getting the same old of what we got, meaning we're going to get like 2 extra maps with the next chapter, probably, and do the same dragon response missions. And we can call in a faction to help us. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. I don't know. It seems like the time gating is a little strange because what they did bring didn't really land a punch. It wasn't open world. You didn't get these mass zone events where like, oh, everyone go to Brisbane Wildlands. It's under attack by Primordius. And then there are like 2 bosses that spawn in the map and you have to kill them both at the same time, or one of them gets really empowered and then just goes across and kills like a bunch of people. And then that would have been really interesting. And it would just kind of cycle through one map and then you could like farm those maps. And really bring more life into the zone. It feels, for someone who doesn't mind time gating, it does feel like it hurts a little bit more because you're like, well, what do I do now? Am I just gonna farm these 3 dragon response missions? Or am I gonna have to wait around for a party to form so I can do a challenge mode? Also, when you're forming a party for the challenge mode, it fits you into a 10-man party, and then you all have to uninvite yourselves and then reform. So it's a little buggy and it's like a little weird. Also, in the LFG, the icon for champions is the Darkmire Delves one. It's a little weird. I think champions chapter 1 Truce is a little underwhelming. And it's supposed to be like the climactic big send-off for End of Dragons. It's supposed to, I really want it to leave a good taste in all of our mouths. Sounds weird. But at least for the first chapter, it really didn't. It's a little lackluster in terms of what it actually like put out. The story's interesting and I'm very much intrigued with the story, but it's a little bare bones in terms of actual things to do. And I know it's supposed to be spread out. Hey, come a week, we might actually get another faction, and maybe with that extra faction, we might get another map. I'm not too sure how this is all gonna work out, but I wouldn't mind if each week there was something bigger and better. But once again, it's just gonna be that instance stuff, and I'm not a fan of like, I'm a fan of instance content, but when Guild Wars 2 has so many forms of instance content, from dungeons to fractals to raids to strike missions to now dragon response missions, they've kind of like bloated themselves so much to the point where you really don't, you're just being flung around to whatever they want you to be flung around to. And these could have worked perfectly fine as dungeons. I think if they were dungeons with like one map having its own weapon skin, like with the Dragon Slayer weapons, or like these 3 dungeons give you that currency for the Dragon Slayer weapons, people would have loved that if you just branded it a bit differently. But because it's this supposed to be like new thing, it just feels like everything that they've already done. And I think that's also a major issue, is that Guild Wars 2 likes to try to rebrand things and rename things, but it puts in an expectation that it's supposed to be different. But in all honesty, it's not. And especially with the Dragon Response missions, it's just like a strike mission version of a dungeon or a fractal. They're just really easy things to do and like not really engaging. I much would have rather had like one map be like under attack with a bunch of all those events and the new bosses and the things to do, rather than just have these 3 instance things. But, you know. Oh, wow. So everyone, in closing thoughts, I'm excited for End of Dragons. I'm a little hopeful for Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, because by then it'll probably feel like we're getting closer. Chapter 1 was lackluster to me, and I think Chapter 2 will probably be lackluster. I think by Chapter 3, if they don't change anything, we'll just come to accept them. But yeah, I'm a little disappointed there was not even like a single open world thing to do. But I think they could have as well. Like if they just made a different form of the map, and then once that chapter, or once the whole entire thing is over, meaning like Chapter 2 or Chapter 3 releases, you revert them back, and that would like reinstall the idea and the trust in this being like an open, living, breathing world that will change. Now it just feels like you go to those maps and nothing happens, so it's a little meh. Everyone, those were my thoughts with the chapter. Like the video if you liked it. Comment down below what you feel about Champions. And subscribe if you want to become a patron and help support the channel. My link's down below. Thank you to my current patrons. You guys are amazing. Don't forget to recommend your videos or message me for some game time. And yeah, stay safe everyone, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye everyone.